Welcome to Section 2, Working with Residential and Commercial Sellers. We're going to start with discussions on solicitation laws. Here's where we get into the next fun-filled section, folks. Okay, Section 2 is working with residential and commercial sellers, and we're going to spend a decent amount of time in this section. Why? Because there's a lot of different things that come into play for both buyers and sellers, but we're starting with the seller section, so we'll hit those in this one. And then, of course, there is a burden to get more information and get accurate information for sellers. So in the seller section, we're going to talk about some of the basics of getting documents together, why these documents are important. We're going to talk about CMAs today. We're going to talk about measuring houses and things of that nature. And we'll just see how it all kind of flows because we spend so much time here. We may or may not get through all of Section 2 today, but we will definitely, at the very least, get into measuring a house. I'll make sure that we get to that point. And so I may have to fast forward to some of the slides and then backtrack a little bit, but we will make it happen. So, folks, let me ask you the million-dollar question. You've got your licenses. Some of you have activated them. Some of you have didn't. So let's say after you activate your license, you've affiliated with a firm, you have a broker in charge, you can go out and actually do real estate. What is now the most important thing for you to do? Find business, folks. Otherwise, it's just a pretty piece of paper on the wall, okay? You got to go out and convince some schmuck to let you help them buy or sell a house, okay? That's it. Because if you're not doing that, then your license has no point. It's just a pretty wall decoration, right? So you've got to go out and find business. Now, this is where we've got to remind you about some of the big solicitation laws, meaning going out and trying to find business. Because, yes, finding business is important, but there are ways that you can get yourself in trouble by doing it incorrectly. So let's start with this first one, folks. Don't you ever try to steal business from another broker, meaning that they actively have a relationship with somebody. Okay, when things expire, that's a completely different ballgame. You can go after those, but and the reason is twofold. Now, as I said yesterday, not all brokers are realtors, but all realtors are brokers. The vast majority of you, the way it sits right now, will probably become realtor members to get access to the MLS and to participate in that regard. And so when you are a realtor member, you have promised to abide by what we call a code of ethics. And there is a very specific subsection, which is articles, I believe, 15 through 17, that deal with how we act amongst each other, our peers, realtor to realtor. Specifically, Article 16 in that grouping basically says you're subject to disciplinary action by the Association of Realtors if you ever try to steal business from another real estate professional. Now, even outside of the articles of the Code of Ethics, if you are not a realtor but are just a broker, folks, if you try to interfere with a contract that somebody has with another person, that can be civil law. You can be sued. It's called tortious interference of a contract, tort law. And so don't do it. This is why we're regularly asking, well, are you already working with another agent? Or, is a house already listed? And so I want to explain this a little bit more in detail because there are so many licensees out there who have this misconception that everybody is always honest and that there's not two sides to the story. And I've taught many classes in my time, and I'll never forget it. I've had agents saying, well, no, here's the thing, Seth. They called me, and their agent's not doing a good job for them. And so, I just feel so bad for these people, and I feel obligated to help them get out of their listing and just help them. Don't you do it. There are two sides to every story. If you start giving people advice on how to terminate, this is exactly what we're talking about. Folks, let me explain how this works. Yes, there are some times that we may get phone calls from sellers who maybe have an agent. They're not ideal for them. They don't like them. They're not doing a good job, whatever they come up with. And they say, well, I want to get rid of my agent and I want to work with you. You can't do that. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are. Here's how that conversation can go. Well, hey, I'm so sorry to hear that, you're not satisfied with your agent. I'm sure they're probably doing the best they can. I'd be happy to help you once your agency agreement ends, but I can't do anything for you until that time. What is the date that your agency agreement ends with your listing agent currently? And they'll tell you the date. And you can say, okay, great. Well, let me send you a listing agreement and we will date it to kick off when your other one ends. Until then, I hope everything works out. Feel free to reach out the day that it ends and we'll get this thing rolling. Good luck. And that's it. And so you'll find when we look at the listing agreement today, there is an option to future date it because it is actively listed with another person. That's fine. As long as you're not giving them advice on how to get out of it, as long as you're not talking ill about the other agent, and as long as it is future dated for the other one ends, that's what we're limited to. If you start telling them, oh, hey, listen, if you call their BIC and you really complain, I bet you can get out of it tomorrow, that's tortious interference of a contract. That's a violation of Article 16 of the Realtor Code of Ethics. Don't do it because it will come back. What they'll do, even if you tell them not to, they'll come back and say, well, this other agent I'm hiring said that if I complain to your BIC, then y'all are going to let me out. And so that's what I'm going to do. And then they're going to file a complaint. So don't mess with it. Doesn't matter what they say. It doesn't matter the story. Folks, I had this exact thing happen many, many years ago. And so it was a listing where they didn't feel like their listing agent was doing an adequate job. And it was a very unique listing at that. And so I didn't even sign it beforehand. I said, okay, on the day that it expires, I will show up at your house and we'll sign the new listing agreement. But until then, I can't really give you advice or, get in the way of anything. And that's the way to do it. Otherwise, you will get yourself in trouble. So let's talk about some other solicitation laws, folks. And word of caution, too, a lot of students will get these confused because they'll group them together. And I'm going to give you a hint here. The name of the law is very telling in what it deals with. For instance, do not call legislation. What type of solicitation do you think it's dealing with when we say do not call legislation?
Do not call list. Phone list.
Phone calls, right? There you go. Folks, it seems silly that I have to say this, but there are students who on a test will say the CAN-SPAM Act deals with phone calls. No. Okay? It's all, let me go ahead and just break it to you. Do not call legislation deals with phone calls. The CAN-SPAM Act deals with spam email, okay, emails. And then the Junk Fax Prevention Act. Anybody want to take a wild guess what that has to deal with?
Mail.
No, not that one.
Not mail?
Junk fax.
Oh, a fax.
There you go. Yeah, it's almost too obvious, isn't it? So the do not call legislation deals with phone calls. CAN-SPAM Act deals with spam emails. And Junk Fax Prevention Act deals with solicitation by way of faxes. Now, folks, I don't think a single one of you is ever going to violate the Junk Fax Prevention Act. I bet most of you, if not all of you, don't even have a fax machine. And if you do, it's probably time to take it to Goodwill, folks. Don't nobody need that negativity anymore in their lives, okay? So, the do not call legislation is, as y'all told me, where you can take and put your name and number on a do not call list. And the presumption here is that will prevent them from having the legal right to call you. I want to explain this. Once upon a time, some horrible, horrible person had this epiphany. I really think that if we just call 1,000 people today, there's enough idiots that we'll get 100 sales. And somebody's like, you think so? And they're like, yeah. And they're like, well, heck, let's give it a try. And so they did. And by God, they were right. They found enough idiots and they got 100 sales that day. And once somebody catches wind of this, folks, this is why we can't have nice things. Everybody ruins it. And so then there's 10 billion businesses making these phone calls day in and day out where nobody even wanted a phone anymore. It was horrible. It still is. And so my guess is that it probably got to some legislators, some senators or somebody, and they were tired of getting these phone calls. And they said, no, we got to pass some laws about this. And so then they came up with the do not call legislation that said, if you put your name on this list, these companies are not allowed to call you and solicit your business. And anybody who's doing phone call solicitation needs to check that list every 31 days. And so the presumption is in about a month after putting your name on the list, you shouldn't receive the phone calls. Well, that sounds great. It doesn't really work, but the legislation is still there. And so why is this important for real estate professionals? Cold calling. Now, folks, I would rather lick sand than do cold calling personally. Okay, that is not my ideal type of lead generation. Does it still work in today's day and age? Sure. Are there plenty of people who have successful businesses from doing cold calling? Absolutely. So just keep that in mind. If you're going to do cold calling, you need to check this registry because it's solicitation. And I hate to break it to you, nobody is more excited to talk to us as real estate agents than they are to talk to the extended car warranty people or the health insurance people. Okay, it's no different. They still don't want to talk to us. It's like, no, it's different. Here's the other thing that I'll tell you too before we get into the details of this law. Folks, there are still 1,000 businesses out there that are making these phone calls regardless of whether you're on the do not call list or not. And here's the thing. For a long period of time, I didn't put my number on there, and I don't know why. Like, I was like, no, I can't do that. What are my clients? But then I'm like, none of my clients are checking this list. So why would I ever be concerned? So I finally put my name and number on the do not call list a couple years ago. And I swear I got more phone calls after I did that. Now, the thing is, there are attorneys that make businesses off of helping you go after and get fines from these companies that will call you even when you're on the do not call list. But the problem is, most of these phone calls you receive, they're coming from Bangladesh today. They'll be in Bucharest tomorrow and Budapest on Thursday. See what I'm saying? It's very hard to find these people. You know who's not hard to find? Real estate professionals, okay? Because it's quite literally our job to plaster our name, email address, and phone number all over the internet so people can find us to help them buy and sell houses. So when you call somebody who's on the do not call list and say, hey, this is Matt, I was just calling to see if you thought about buying or selling any real estate. And they say, Matt, what firm you with? Oh, ABC Realty. And what's your phone number, Matt? Oh, it's 91977, right? Tells them all, and they're like, well, great, Matt. Thank you so much for that information. And Matt's like, well, are you interested in buying or selling? No, Matt, but my name and number's on the do not call registry, and so you'll be hearing from my attorney for violating my rights under the do not call legislation. And then they're going to hang up on you. I hope you sell some houses in the other cold calls you make because you're about to get some fines. So it's important to know when you can and when you can't. So the straightforward thing is, as a real estate professional, if we check the call list and they're on the do not call list, don't call them to solicit business. Now, there are a couple exceptions, meaning times where you could call them, even if they are on the do not call list. And so the exceptions are if they give you permission or direct invitation to call them. You should probably document that invitation so that they can't go back and say that they didn't give it to you. If you have an established business relationship, now it's going to be on a slide in a second, but it is if you have helped them in a business transaction within the past 18 months, or if they've done a direct inquiry on your business page or website in the past 3 months, then you can call them. If you have a personal relationship with them, they're your brother, your sister, your auntie, your uncle, your niece's girlfriend's nephew, sister's cousin, something like that, you can call them. And then, of course, if you are a tax-exempt nonprofit, you are exempt because you are not soliciting for business purposes. You're soliciting for charitable purposes. So, a little bit different there. So, little clarity on some of these. I told you the whole reason this is in existence is because people don't want these phone calls. Half of us don't even want our phones anymore. Half of us don't answer our phones anymore. I've gotten to the point where I answer it, but as soon as it makes a weird sound or you take a while to answer, I just automatically hang up and block it. I'm just so over it at this point in my life. But this is to help make sure that, people aren't receiving phone calls. Now, as I said, the exemptions, express permission or invitation, you need to retain that authorization. The established business relationship, as I said, if you have helped them in a transaction within the past 18 months, or if you have had an inquiry on your website from them or something like that within the past 3 months. Personal relationship, relative, friend, sisters, cousins, nieces, nephews, boyfriends, something. So if you are cold calling, you need to make sure you're checking the list. And or if they're on the list, don't call them. unless they meet one of these exempted criteria. And even then, be very careful because they still might not like it. So, are you required to cold call? No. Is your firm maybe going to ask you to? Potentially. But it's not a requirement. And so also be aware that you do have to maintain an in-house do not call list. So even if they're not on the federal one, if you call somebody and you say, well, hey, have you thought about buying or selling? They say no, and don't call me again. You need to store their name and number and don't call them again. There is a requirement to maintain an in-house do not call list. Now, let me talk about this little note here. The FCC has specifically ruled that calls to for sale by owners and expired listings with other firms are not excluded from the act. Meaning, if you're going to call expired listings, you need to check and make sure that their name and number is not on the do not call list. They're not exempt. You did not have a relationship with them. Another firm had a relationship with them. Same thing with for sale by owners, folks. If you're going to call a for sale by owner and try to solicit and say, well, hey, I can help you sell your house, then you need to check the do not call list. The only exemption to the for sale by owners, you can call them even if their name is on the do not call list, if and only if you have a buyer client interested in putting an offer in on their property. That's it. But there are agents out there who thought they were slick and they got themselves in trouble because they would call to make appointments saying they had a buyer client that was interested with a seller. And then they would show up without a buyer client. Oh, my buyer changed their mind, but I figured I'd come see your house and see if it was going, and then they'd start trying to do things. Don't do that. Don't pretend to have a buyer to start having a conversation with the seller. Don't try to, folks, if you're on the phone with them and the conversation goes at any point to, I can help you sell, and they're on the do not call list, they could still come after you. So expired listings and for sale by owners are not exemptions. So here's what I just said. Don't solicit. But if you got a buyer client interested, you can call them even if they're even if they are on the do not call list. And then please be aware, because a lot of people have a tendency to get confused once you start talking about the do not call list. Folks, if they're not on the do not call list, there is nothing stopping you from calling them. They're still not going to like it. They're still going to hate your guts. They're going to be rude to you, but there's nothing stopping you. Now, the reason why this is so important is because, as I said, real estate professionals are very easy to find. And I told you that there is a big group of attorneys who make their business off of going after people who violated these. Now, if we're talking about fines for the FCC, you get $500 per violation, maybe trebled if willful, meaning up to 3 times or more if you're doing it intentionally without regard for the laws or the rules. But when you get to the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, folks, you can be fined up to $11,000 per violation. As I said earlier, I hope you got some sales out of those cold calls because you're going to need them to pay your fines. $11,000 is no joke. Now, even at the state level, there are penalties for this. And so, obviously, the Federal Communications Commission and the Federal Trade Commission are the FCC, the FTC. And then North Carolina-wise, your first violation, fines up to $500. Second violation, up to $1,000. Third and subsequent violations within 2 years of the first, up to $5,000. There's some money to be made out there if you're an attorney going after people for this stuff. I will make a statement too, folks. At lunch, I will share these slides with you because I know a lot of you are taking notes. You can have these slides. That way you can go back and look at them. I've got a PDF version of them, I believe. I'm always happy to share them. I want to make sure that you are more than prepared. I promise y'all we're going to be more than prepared for your test. I'm going to give you everything and anything. But I know some people like supplemental study materials just because they're, they don't love test taking or things like that. So I'll share them at lunch today. So, that is the do not call legislation. Let's talk about the Junk Fax Prevention Act. Okay? As I said, ain't nobody in this room going to violate the Junk Fax Prevention Act. Okay? So, it's not going to happen. So, basically, this is dealing with solicitation by way of facsimile. Folks, if you're not familiar, okay, I want you to process this for a second. If you wanted to solicit by way of fax, you would have to have printed ads. and you'd walk over to your fax machine, and then you'd put those papers on your fax machine, and then you would type in a phone number, 1-888-777-6542, send. And then it's going to scan in your ad. This is like a scanner making all kinds of crazy noises. And you're going to hear a dial tone, just like when we used to log into the internet back in 1994. Okay. And then it's going to make some horrible sounds, and it's going to send some digital data to their device. And then their device is going to print it out just like your device scanned it in. And that was the way that they used to advertise certain things. And so then you just be like walking past your fax machine and you're like, no, if you'd like to buy or sell, call Caroline. Okay, cool. There's their phone number, right? And then they just go on with their day and they have the information. So if you were advertising by way of faxes, of course, if somebody is receiving this advertisement, it has to contain instructions on how to opt out. Well, folks, now that you are all with me on how you send a fax, that means when you send that paper and it comes through, it says, oh, call Caroline Muldoon if you want to, sell a house. And then out at the bottom it says, if you'd like to opt out, send a cover sheet that says opt out back to 919-772-6663. And that was her fax number. And so they'd have to write opt out on a big piece of paper, type it in, put it in, and send it back. And that was the rule, is that you had to give them instructions on how to opt out. And of course, if you continue to advertise, you would get fines of up to $500 per fax. Not really a thing anymore. The only people who still have fax machines are attorneys, because it's arguably still a very secure way of sending some data, because nobody's trying to intercept that anymore. They don't even think people are still doing it. So, there you go. The Junk Fax Prevention Act. And there is a picture of an old school fax machine for your viewing enjoyment, in case you didn't know. So, folks, let's talk about the anti-spam laws. Now, more specifically, the anti-spam laws. It was actually called the CAN-SPAM Act. Okay, the CAN-SPAM Act. And it's got a really interesting name. If you didn't know this, CAN-SPAM, C-A-N-S-P-A-M, stood for Controlling the Assault of Non-Solicited Pornography and Mail Act. You didn't know that, did you? Some of you are like, what? Pornography? But folks, listen. Let's go back to 1994 when we all had dial-up that I just referenced. The internet was a wild, wild place when it first... I mean, it's still a wild, wild place, but there's more cat videos than not nowadays, and that's a little bit better. But folks, if you don't remember when we all got AOL, Instant Messenger, and mails, our inboxes were full of, would you like to see this woman naked and take these pills to grow your something, something or another, okay? It was just all kinds of crazy stuff on the internet. And so it became such a big thing so fast that it did not take them long to pass laws on regulating these digital mailboxes that we had, these email boxes. And so that's why they came the name, Controlling the Assault of Non-Solicited Pornography and Mail, meaning, you're just sending it and just going nuts with it. And so basically what it talks about is if you're sending mass mailers, meaning to a lot of people at once, you can send them, but it has to contain a very conspicuous, easy to locate opt-out or unsubscribe notice. And once they unsubscribe, you better stop sending them these mails. Now, for us as real estate agents, I can't imagine that any of us are going to get in trouble for unsolicited pornography. All right? But just listeds, just sold, weekly newsletters, market data, market trends, all these things that we send out to our sphere, our past clients, our database, these fall under these regulations, and they all have to contain this opt-out or unsubscribe notice. And like I said, when they unsubscribe, you better stop emailing them. Now, this doesn't pertain to one-on-one emails. There's no unsubscribe notice. You can block people if you don't want to talk to them. But that's what this comes into play with. Okay? Has to contain that conspicuous opt-out or unsubscribe notice. If you're on like Target or Walmart or Starbucks, like weekly mailers, if you look down at the bottom, you'll see any of these advertisements. They all contain the unsubscribe, opt-out, be removed from our list, whatever it may be. Now, folks, there are certain types of marketing that are always arguably acceptable, or at least there's no federal legislation. What are they? What type of solicitation can you always do that's not federally regulated? Well, not like nonprofits, but I mean, what ways could you go out as a real estate agent and try to get business for you that the federal government does not have a law or rule against?
Is it door to door?
Door to door, door knocking, and
Yeah.
snail mail. Nailed it, folks. Door knocking and snail mail are not federally regulated. You can always send out snail mail, as we call it. Now, please be aware that snail mail is very expensive, and if you send it to my house, it's going to end up in a fire pit, and I'm never even going to open it. Okay? The only time I check it's so bad. The only time I check my mail is if I know I'm got to check a new credit card or like, something that is very important coming in through the mail. Otherwise, like I look through it, I'm like, crap. I will tell you that I do like handwritten stuff. I have a tendency to open, and of course there's marketing people who are smart. And so if you ever want to send out mailers, folks, handwrite it. Because if you handwrite the email, people, they're like, oh, do I know this person? They open it. But of course, then I'm like, I thought this was a letter from grandma. And it was just some real estate agent. Of course, grandma's not alive, so it wouldn't be from grandma. But you can always snail mail and door knock. Now, I'm going to tell you a couple things, okay? As I said, snail mail comes with consistency. I hate to say it. I'm not going to say it's dead. But the more you do it, people will start seeing your face or start seeing you. And then if they ever decide to sell, they're more likely to get a phone call. But let's talk about door knocking, okay? It is completely acceptable, legally speaking. However, if there is a neighborhood that has a no soliciting sign at the front of the neighborhood, or if there's an individual house that has a no soliciting sign, folks, don't you knock on that door. Because if those people had the time to go out and buy that sign, they got the time to make your life an HE double hockey sticks, okay? They can. They will find and they will leave you bad reviews. They will harass you. They will talk bad about you on Facebook forums. They get real irritated if you do not adhere to their no soliciting sign. So pay attention to that. They don't like it. Now, here's the other thing that I'm going to talk about for door knocking. It's not for everybody, and there's, of course, inherent safety concerns. Folks, I want you to think about this. If personally, I don't do it, and here's why, right? If somebody knocks on your door, what's the first thing that everybody does? Shh, be quiet. Shh, they'll go away. So first and foremost, everybody wants to pretend they're not home because they don't want to answer the door because they're like, why are they here, right? Y'all remember like back in like the 70s, people just like show up. They might come inside, have a slice of pie. Like not anymore. Like somebody knocks on our door, we're pulling out. You got a gat in your hand. You're just like waiting. It's like, just go. Did you order pizza? No, I don't think so. No, I didn't either. Okay. Everybody gets super weird about it. But here's the thing: if I was to knock on somebody's door, folks, I know this. I'm not doing this, right? If I knock on the door, somebody answers it. Somebody's gonna think I'm trying to sell them on lumberjack Jesus. Okay, I'm gonna look like a missionary and a lumberjack combined. They're like, no, sir, we do not want to hear about the Lord and Savior lumberjack Jesus. And I'm like, oh, actually, a real estate agent, but okay. But I'll tell you this funny story. I had an agent, acquaintance, friend in the Triangle Market, and some of you may run into her. It was funny. I was telling this story, and I'm going to tell it exactly like I told it, and I didn't drop any names. And somebody in my class knew who I was talking about and dropped her name. Like, oh my God, you could tell who I was talking about just from that. There was a young lady, and she's still in the real estate industry, and she had great success with door knocking. She got a lot of business. But folks, here's the thing about her. She's about 4'0" with the countryest accent you'd ever hear in your life. Okay? Now listen, I'm going to tell you why the people answer the door. Because this little thing knocks on the door. You think she's selling Girl Scout cookies. Of course, I'm going to open the door and like, you got Thin Mints? Right? It's like, oh, selling houses? No. So for her, she was not, in any way, shape, or form considered to be a threat. She was itty bitty, and of course, people opened the door for her. But the thing is, for her, I hope she took somebody because safety is of the utmost concern, folks, for both the consumers and you. And so the general rule of thumb when you knock on doors, take a few steps back. Don't ever stand right at the door. Because people don't like that if you're right there. And so you take a few steps back off their porch or whatever. So then that way they can kind of look out there and know that, you know, who you are. Take somebody with you, especially, you ladies for sure. The world is crazy out there. So some people have great success with it. But just know your market, know what you're doing. I would argue, too, you need to be able to provide something of value. Folks, if you just knock and say, have you thought about buying or selling? People don't like that. If you show up, take a paper that has a market report on it. Hey, just thought you might be interested to see how your neighborhood's doing as a whole from the time you bought to now, the way that prices have appreciated. People love things of value. Now, I'll tell you the hands down the best way to door knock. If you hold an open house in that neighborhood, because then you've got something really of value. And the way that we used to train people, used to call this Tell 20. You can call it whatever you want. But if you're holding an open house in that neighborhood the week before, you go out and you have an open house flyer and you knock and you say, hey, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I'm a real estate agent. I'm going to be holding an open house at 123 Main Street, 2 cul-de-sacs down next Saturday. In case you knew anybody that might love your beautiful neighborhood, or if you wanted to come see it, just wanted to give you a flyer. And you've done 2 things. You've showed them you've got gumption as a real estate professional because you're out there door knocking. And you invited them to be nosy in their neighborhood. People love to be nosy. They're like, ooh, Susan's selling her house. I always wanted to see how she had it decorated in there, right? And so then they're going to show up and they're going to see you're the real estate professional who's willing to go out and put those signs out, who's willing to hold the open houses, who's willing to pass those things. So you show yourself as a very detail-oriented and hardworking agent, and you've invited them to be nosy. Folks, that is a win-win. Don't show up with nothing. Okay, you've got to give them something of value. And it doesn't have to be candy, and it doesn't have to be money. It doesn't have to be gifts. It doesn't have to be anything like that. Something of value is come to this open house so you can be nosy. Here's the market trend report. Here's something like that. But that's hands down the best way to door knock. If you're just going around and just knocking on people's doors, you might as well just leave something there, like a market report or something. And that's always a good idea, too. To avoid the face-to-face exposure, you are allowed to just put, get those door hanger bags and you put a little flyer or something in there. That's a great way to go. You're not allowed to put anything in anybody's mailbox. Don't do that. There's a lot of people who make that mistake. You are not the USPS. Only the USPS can open somebody's mailbox and put stuff in there. So, there you go.